When we talk about video games, the words brand tie-in can get pretty loaded. To some, it's associated with some pretty bad games, titles that were only purchased because they had recognizable characters or affiliations. Games with tie-ins can also be good no thanks to these IP inclusions, being plainly good in spite of the abject placement. However, the best results of these matrimonies is when the game succeeds and is elevated by the authentic spirit of the source material. Even if the game takes some liberties, the ties of how its characters or settings are portrayed in video games can magnify the uniqueness of why we like that property in the first place. It's the peanut butter and chocolate of games, if you will. The curious thing is, what becomes of these tie-ins when the identity of that thing is fluid, constantly changing, and the most common constant is more so an idea than any particular theme. The Danish company LEGO is an entertainment titan that now holds dominance as the world's biggest toy maker. And since you clicked on this video, there's a high probability that these toys have impacted your life. Its methods of creativity and imagination are something that inspire people to create and socialize with, building themselves stories that they tell with LEGO's unique or licensed properties. Or better yet, the ones that people make up themselves. The LEGO games we have now, though, are much different than the ones we had 10, 20, or even 30 years ago. So how did we get here, and what changed? This is a story of when a company tried new things to meet a dawning digital age. A story of when things turned experimental. A story of when those experiments went too far, and how in going through this journey, it helped it learn to be more original and imaginative than ever before. So, using racing games as our anchor, buckle up and join me, if you will, as we play through history and see beyond binary-coded bricks what video games reveal the essence of LEGO. Now before we get on the road, we do need to drive by two quick stops first, those being the very first LEGO games. They both include a form of racing in them, but the real reason we're here is to do a general vibe check of what it meant to be LEGO in the time of these first games. In the 80s and 90s, the popularity of the toy market was slowly being eaten away by a new entertainment system. A new way that children could spend their time that took them away from playing with bricks on the floor. Seeing the popularity of this and facing their own financial woes if something wasn't done about it, LEGO signed off on these games to test the waters in the game industry. The first was very safe and very true to the source material. In 1995, LEGO Fun to Build was made for the Sega Pico. It's primarily a series of mini-games with some set-building puzzles placed throughout to unify the experience. There's also a small brick-building toolset that gives perhaps a basic but playable activity of snapping bricks together in a pseudo-3D space. For a game on older hardware, this is really alright and still retains the most universal method combo of build something, then play with it. The other interesting aspect is the nature of the pages on the Sega Pico, which is essentially an interactive picture book. On each page, you have images showing off real purchasable LEGO sets, ready to come alive with the press of a pen. Looking mighty similar to what you might see in a LEGO Club magazine, it starts to hint that even though this was the LEGO Group's first rodeo in the game department, it didn't mean they were blind at understanding the toy department. LEGO Fun to Build was a good debut effort, but it was only available in Japan, and so from an international level, the true trailblazer would come 2 years later from LEGO Island on the PC. While there's a lot to be said about the game's mechanics and early 3D world made by the company Mindscapes, the most memorable part is just how the LEGO characters and settings are portrayed in this 3D form. If the game had a design bible for what they were allowed not to do, I imagine it was the same traditional rules that the LEGO company had, such as not depicting violence more than comic mischief. Comic mischief, however, does not exclude the fever dream qualities that can occur on LEGO Island. The sets and pieces are well represented, but as you can see from this raceway footage, the way the minifigures move and appear have this unsupervised chaos energy to them, and I kind of adore it. It's likely that we won't see something as extreme as Lego Island again, but the fact that the LEGO Group would allow the possibilities of such extreme and experimental natures is indicative of what the company was willing to go with in the name of innovation, especially when trying their hand at their first proper video game. So with the stage set, what would it mean for the world's largest tire manufacturer to adventure further into the gaming frontier? In 1992, there was Mario Kart, and it was good. Despite the competition insisting otherwise, its undeniable appeal would be so uncontested that it popularized a brand new subgenre of video game overnight. While item-based racers have been around for a handful of years, the term kart racer produces very vivid imagery going nowadays further than the vehicles of their inspiration. The design of the karts in Super Mario Kart deliberately distanced themselves from the normal cars to remove your predefined notions of what racing an automobile would feel like. Subtract that realism, and everything else is on the table. And thus, Nintendo's colorful cast of Mario characters that had accrued over the past 10 years came together in a contextless blend, racing with whomever and wherever would make the game more interesting in the Mushroom Kingdom. Kart racing became not only an entry point into racing with less serious items and play modes, but its patron saint proved that it was the perfect mixture of an IP crossover event. This was the perfect test track for LEGO. Jumping from Lego Island with a number of safe and simple bets such as chess and digital building tools, a new publishing division of LEGO Media greenlit LEGO Racers for the Nintendo 64, PlayStation, and PC. Outside of LEGO fun-to-build Sega Pico game, LEGO had stuck with computer games in a move very emblematic of a European company's PC gaming sensibilities. In 1999, this would change and would result in... Okay, yes, LEGO Rock Raiders is fantastic, but a kart racer that holds its own pretty well. On a surface level, it's your run-of-the-mill kart racer, but to leave it at that would be a disservice to where it performs well and how it represents the LEGO brand. As the 90s went on, developers were getting much better at creating games in a 3D space, and you can absolutely see that the team at High Voltage Software were really cooking with gas here. Most models are fully polygonal, and all car models spare no expense in making each LEGO creation pop. That does come at a cost though. While Diddy Kong Racing, Crash Team Racing, and Mario Kart 64 all compromised with cars partially or fully made of 2D sprites, this assisted in the performance, allowing for all three of those games to support 4 players. LEGO Racers, in comparison, only supports 2-player racing. Especially in the rubber banding and random nature of items, kart racing games are made to be lighthearted party games, and for that reason, it's been a notch against LEGO Racers. It slides down from a game you play with a group of friends to a game you play with maybe your sibling. If we leave it at that, it's a lesser kart racer, in the same vein as other titles like Muppet Race Mania or Chocobo Racing, still providing a good time but stunted in its capacity. It's also a bit frustrating when you do play multiplayer and the split screen window is horizontal, making for bad vision on many vertical slopes. If you judge the game by its multiplayer, it's simply serviceable. But I would posit that the primary intention of the series is not to focus so much on multiplayer, but focus on how to create an entertaining single-player journey. That journey usually starts with you building a car. Opening up the game, the very first option is to build, and this is absolutely one of the most brilliant parts of the game. There are pre-made racers and karts, but the building mechanic is so versatile yet simple that it keeps itself open to the entertainment of a youth or adult fan of LEGO. The prompt to create is not only true to the nature of LEGO's build then play nature, but adding your own personal spin makes you salivate to try it out on the road. It comes as a perfect motivator as well that beating more circuits will only unlock more themes and bricks, bringing you back to this option of building and customizing your character and car to freshen up the experience. The reward for racing is more building, and more building only makes you want to race more. The concept of building then adapting even finds its way into the karting staple of items. As you collect different bricks, the color coincides with a particular power. Red bricks are aggressive, blue bricks are protection, and yellow bricks are traps, to name the basics. White bricks, though, improve the quality of the item you're holding. So I could use the red brick's default cannonball, or I could build it up and score a homing missile instead. It removes the mostly random rubber banding items of Mario Kart to suggest a tactical choice when you drive up to an ability brick. It's a bold choice that adds flavor to the game, but returns to the age-old problem of how to make the game interesting or viable for when you're behind. Racers doesn't bother in tackling that problem much, and instead doubles down on this system to further complement the story of the single player. The Grand Prix mode sees you pitted against a series of racers, changing depending on the circuit, with the main stars of the show being the bosses, who will most commonly be the frontrunner. These bosses are from LEGO sets of the time, and each has a brief but memorable atmosphere, with a cutscene even taunting you before the circuit begins. Each AI plays a little bit differently. Redbeard will spam cannonballs, King Kahuka will shield constantly. Both incentivize using different strategies, but things get more interesting when you reach the third circuit and Basil the Batlord. One aspect of LEGO Racers that I have a love-hate relationship with is its warp power. Green bricks are your standard speed boost for the first 3 upgrades. Each of these all well and good, but obtaining the 4th brick will give you a dimensional warp. It's just objectively the best power in the game, blasting you far ahead of your position and likely far beyond the other racers. In the first 2 cups, using them almost felt like cheating. Maps were easy enough to manage, the white bricks were accessible in supply, and many a race would have me far ahead of everyone else, almost as if I was cheating. That changed with Circuit 3. The tracks and racers are more hostile, with green bricks hard to find, and white bricks inconveniently out of the way. For the first time though, the boss will also try to warp, which showed me that the game didn't care if I was being classy or not. In fact, it was expecting me not to be. I got utterly smoked by this warp-driving son of a gun, and like the third opponent in an arcade fighting game, Mr. Batlord was here to humble my confidence. So I fought fire with fire, doing more daring driving to feed my speed cravings, and getting that full warp set again. As I mentioned before, completing each circuit gives you new bricks, but it also gives you the car of your conquered opponent. Call it pettiness or revenge, but after multiple attempts of trying to beat Basil, taking his ride for a spin was a lovely reward. Even the finale makes it perfectly clear that to beat the final champion Rocket Racer, you're going to need to warp, as even the final stage allows you to enter a portal and get ahead. It's a really fun final race, as you forsake the means of normal racing for something incredibly dopamine-inducing. Speaking of racetracks, LEGO Racers is probably one of, if not the best-looking kart racers of the era in terms of its course set. Again, it benefits from not needing the 4 screens rendered for multiplayer, but the tracks really do stand out in terms of having it feel like you're driving through a ride rather than a racetrack. Although the LEGO Group had only just arrived into the games industry, they had quite the history of running a theme park. With the Billund Park in 1968 and the very newly opened Windsor Park in 1996, each track really nails the atmosphere of each set, with different attractions. Amazon Adventure Alley sees you drive through the jungle, into a temple, and up a watery rapid. Night Marathon has you go through a spooky castle and then along the outskirts while an airship and dragon loom overhead. Many LEGO sets also include some sort of dynamic play feature, and even those feel like they're represented in the shortcuts found within the game. It does a fantastic job encompassing many LEGO assets together to feel like you jumped into a world that a LEGO magazine would sell you on. It should be noted that in creating some different themes though, they may have gone a little bit careless in some portrayals. Pirates and space people are always winners, but retrospectively it's in a bit poor taste at how the Islanders come off with no other trait than really being dopey. It's indicative of its execution that child me thought that King Kahuka's broken English and dances were funny, that the Islanders were added with a shorthand that writes them off to be incompetent. There is a way to represent native Caribbean culture, and I think that King Kahuka's model, car, and stage are fun. But I think the core intention of its presentation is exoticism, with Kahuka's only trait being that he is a bit kooky, even in the opening cinematic being the first to clumsily rocket off the track. It's not that this wasn't normal and for its time, see Papu Papu in Crash Team Racing, but much like how one comes back to an old game and finds trouble adapting to older clunky controls, a part of me sees this clunky writing and feels the same way. With that out of the way though, I still really love LEGO Racers. The item system is fun and unique, the cars handle pretty well, and the game even provides a great time trial mode if you wanted to perfect the tracks without combat items. The game balances the build and play nature of LEGO with visual accuracy of LEGO iconography. Its multi-platform nature in a way even showed its intent. Here was a game that paraded all the best LEGO stories and sets, adding in new favorites and entering in the subgenre that celebrated a form of IP opulence. It really seemed like LEGO agreed that LEGO Racers felt like a theme park ride as well, as a little over a year later, LEGO Racers would be introduced at Legoland Windsor. It carried much the same aesthetic as LEGO Racers, but would actually be made by a new company, Attention to Detail, with its own modified game engine, despite the similar look and feel. Unfortunately, I never had a chance to ride this myself, but the footage from park goers shows the same formula that would be used in other theme parks of creating a custom ride and then testing it out. I would wager though that certainly none of them did it as well as LEGO in terms of a cool factor, because of how the build and play philosophy already associates with the brand and concept. The ride did go through a fair amount of turbulence in its relatively short life, but perhaps its most important impact was that this got Attention to Detail acquainted with the LEGO group. But we'll put a pin in that for now. Among other firsts, LEGO Racers was also the very first LEGO game to be put on a handheld console. And I wish I could just leave it at that and move on. LEGO Racers for the Game Boy Color is true to its word. It's technically LEGO, and it is technically racing, but it's so stripped down and poorly thought out that I could never see myself recommending it, even to the curious player. Creating a character in car is obviously much more flattened down. The design of the character is okay, but the car is really what suffers. Excluding a paint job, there are only 54 different permutations of cars that you can make, and out of the choices you have 3 different bricks to choose from and 2 sets of wheels. I absolutely applaud the work done in base LEGO Racers car building. According to a 1999 developer journal, the pre-production for car building took over a year, and it really shows. I have extreme doubt that the Game Boy port by Climax Studios had this luxury of time, and based on its constraints, I almost wonder if it was really worth adding the feature. Considering how limited it is, there's only slight novelty to the feeling of building and racing your car, but considering that the pieces you build with are incredibly uninteresting, it made me just wish that I had a choice between 1 or 2 pre-built cars with the ability to just make my own custom character. Getting to the gameplay, there is sadly far less to excuse. After playing through Super Monaco GP and F1 Race for a previous video, I really appreciated what they did with the limited screen space of Handhelds to communicate the relevant information to a player. These 2 games thoughtfully placed a map for players and additional signage to know when turns would be coming up. Also, in F1 Race, it would display how far away you were from the frontrunner, and conservatively but tastefully show the background to inspire. 8 years later, LEGO Racers came to the Game Boy Color and learned none of the lessons from these games. There is technically a map shown only at the beginning of the race, but try as I might, I could never figure out where I was due to the jostling of elevation alongside the complete lack of turn forecasting or landmarks. With this lack of direction, the game just becomes a fuddled mess of orientation, and the other racers could be anywhere in front of you, or behind you. You don't really know. There really wasn't much good to do with the items either, as about every 5 seconds I was bombarded with a new one, and because the next item might always be an optimal green brick, it was almost never worth it to hold on to other items. The only nice thing I can say about this is that the scenery and music are accurate to the console races they're emulating, but both are soured with the scenery taking up way too much screen real estate and the music being loud and obnoxious on the Game Boy Color speakers. Does this still feel like a LEGO game? Enough, I suppose, but in the same way that a teacher looks at a school paper and passes it for doing what it says on the grading rubric, and not because the work itself is good. While I was making this video, my wife and I moved into our first house and we're pretty busy with renovations. I knew that in order to make this video and get it done in a somewhat reasonable amount of time, I would need to take some shortcuts, and so for this video, I didn't fully complete any of the handheld games. This game made me thankful that I made that decision, even if it would have only taken an hour or two to beat it. LEGO Racers had certainly set the course for future installments, but it wasn't the only idea of how to make a racing game that fit the mold of LEGO. The thing is, the mold of LEGO's image didn't appear to have settled yet, and so LEGO Stunt Rally returned for just a moment, back into something unorthodox and more to the weirdness of LEGO Island. Well, unorthodox may be the wrong word to use though, as in fact, LEGO Stunt Rally borrows its gameplay from some of the oldest electronic racing games possible. Controls of LEGO Stunt Rally actually come from the concept of slot car racing, popular in the 1960s. Slot car racing was primarily set along the built track. This technology commonly went alongside what you would see in model trains, and perhaps it's no coincidence then that LEGO Stunt Rally's developer, Intelligent Games, made LEGO Loco, a digital model train game. Coincidence or not, slot racing shares a lot with model trains as both fall into the same hurdles when piloting them. Essentially, all you have is the power of acceleration on the vehicle, and depending on how much power you put into it, the little engine will determine the fate of gliding smoothly along or spectacularly flying off the track. LEGO Stunt Rally has a little bit of sway in terms of allowing small nudges to the right and left, but for the most part, you can win every race with only using a single button. And it's absolutely fantastic. The great thing of putting this into a digital space is that it provides new avenues for quality of life. Where the cars used to run off the track until you would manually reset them, vehicles can now slide off by a pretty large margin and pathfind back to the track in a few seconds. It makes the spin-out moments funnier because even if you do fly off the rails, you'll be warped back only with minor consequences. Given this easy-to-recover method, the game then takes pleasure at sending you off the track. As you play through the game's main championship mode, its levels increasingly feature a wily coyote attitude of making you go splat. As you go throughout the token desert, jungle, and ice worlds, the environments naturally also get harder to handle, and so it's a constant experimentation of knowing how to customize your car to handle the slippery track and its complexities. Speaking of handling and customization, where LEGO racers relished at the creation of their own 3D avatar for racing, Stunt Rally gives a choice at a list of predefined characters. This cast is from the 2000s race line that came out with the game. It does this, however, to take a stab at different visualization of the action. Similar to Carmageddon, if you play on a higher graphical setting, the bottom left of the screen shows pre-rendered reactions of your racer as they navigate the terrain and compete against other racers. Because the gameplay is so zoomed out, the devs wisely chose an alternative instead of creating an objective downgrade, or a repeat of what you'd seen a year before. They still all have this experimental 2000s LEGO energy to them. 3D models were still in relative infancy, and IRL LEGO models were also relatively basic, most of them only having a painted texture on their front torso. For that reason, we get an interesting bunch of minifigures, topped off with some cheesy 2000s CG. The piece de resistance, though, is the purple magical man of LEGO Stunt Rally. This love child of speed racer and sorcery, Mr. X, feels incredibly LEGO in that he's a minifigure an imaginative child would make, more than a company. He is your fully voice-acted guide through all game's festivities, and his presence adds this absolutely charmy hominess to the game. It's certainly not what you would imagine as a modern kids game, but I appreciate the slow and easy line reads he does, like a sleepy librarian who chooses not to retire and drives into work in a snazzy car.
Hello, sorry to interrupt. If you need some help, remember you can click on the question mark. Well done. I'm very impressed to see you have defeated the sneaky Baron Flambeau. I think you're ready to try your luck in the jungle now. Come on, time to get moving. Better to be the hare than the tortoise, or was it the other way round?
Aside from Mr. X, every other character is just a whooping and grunting LEGO figurine, and that suits the game quite fine, honestly. Legendary LEGO figurines Johnny Thunder and Sam Sinister make a cameo appearance in the opening cutscene, but you don't actually race against them as all the bosses are original characters. I will say the brevity of pre-rendered cutscenes don't have as much pizzazz as the introductions of LEGO racers, and the fact that you primarily race these characters only once makes the rivalry very brief. In one way, it's not representing the breadth of LEGO worlds, but in other ways, it at least uses the creativity of LEGO to make new creations and slot in its own ideas. The same applies to how Stunt Rally does cars. Intelligent Games made a large option of unique vehicles, all with different characteristics to handling, speed, and weight, and they're much similar to a standard kart racer than even LEGO Racers was. Similar to how beating circuits in LEGO Racers rewarded you with bricks for your car and customization for your character, playing through the championship on your way to Mr. X sees you unlocking cars, but the unique part is getting tiles for the construction section, which I would argue is the main attraction of LEGO Stunt Rally. Where LEGO Racers lets you build a race car, LEGO Stunt Rally lets you build a race track. It's a bit crazy to how few racing games do this, and I was kind of baffled to see it here when I started the game up. It turns out that LEGO Stunt Rally took a third of its name from the graphical miracle that is the game Stunts for MS-DOS. Not only was this a 3D racing game in 1990, but this game also allowed you to create your own custom tracks and then race them. To this day, to be the architect of your own track is a bit of a rare sight, or segmented to games that specialize in it. But not only does LEGO Stunt Rally do it well, but it uses LEGO's unique properties to make it even more than just a simple track editor. The building method only takes about a minute or two to really understand, and of course Mr. X is there to lend a hand if you need it. From there, you're off to the races, with freedom to track placement, traps, items, or even change up the elevation if you want. As mentioned before, the championship races slowly give you track pieces as rewards, but not before teaching you naturally how the unique pieces work to inspire your replication in builder mode. It's again this lovely loop of making the building complement to play. While it never forces you to focus on building, if all you want to do is experience the tailored content, these levels are here to nudge you in the direction of the track builder in a way that feels nothing but complementary. A possible secret to its liveliness is also the large range of options to stylize your environments. Although never working on a SimCity game themselves, Intelligent Games were well acquainted with Maxis, developing Sim Isle, and in some ways, LEGO Loco also fit the city building adjacency of placing little buildings around a tiny little track. It's pretty impressive how much effort they put into making these little towns, jungles, and ice bases feel like their own place. I wouldn't say it's the same theme park feeling of LEGO Racers, mostly due to the camera perspective, but it still has its own life to it, and the fact that you can make it makes it more personal. I really don't have a lot of issues with this game. The only ones that come to mind, other than a missing lap timer, is that I'm able to beat it in a 2-hour sitting. But then again, I'm an adult who's pretty okay with these games, and 2 hours is right up my alley on a busy schedule. I guess another issue is that it didn't come out on home consoles, so it would be easier to play the 4-player mode, which there is by the way, but that's not really the PC game's fault, and the fact is it was planned for a release on the PlayStation. Seriously, the biggest problem is that there was never a sequel to Stunt Rally. I imagine if a game came out like this today, it would be tagged like something of Super Mario Maker of racing, but I think it's a problem that people just didn't know it existed. Maybe it's because the main version was only on PC, perhaps the stunt part was overemphasized, driving away some of its potential buyers, but whatever the reason, LEGO Stunt Rally feels like a game forgotten to time compared to LEGO Racers. Whichever way it stands, LEGO Stunt Rally was different, going in a completely different direction from where the industry was headed. Whether it's remembered for its slot car gameplay, its buildable tracks, or Mr. X, it deserves to be remembered, and is a fine example of how to make an enticing LEGO game. LEGO Stunt Rally for the Game Boy Color, though, is a weird one. It's a mix of negatives and positives that doesn't nullify the result, but makes you scratch your head in wondering if the game was good without coming to a solid answer. I have a soft spot for video game ports, and LEGO Stunt Rally was quick to swoon me with its ambition. The game features pretty much everything from the PC game in a way that trounces the attempt made by LEGO Racers on handheld. Still intact is the championship mode, the track customizer, and of course Mr. X. But in translation to handheld, we have lost that charming librarian voice. Honestly, I think it should be in more games.
Fantastic. You have defeated Snake in the dangerous jungle.
For the presentation, I have no qualms with the game. Its large picture portraits definitely struggle with how many colors the Game Boy Color can handle, but the game makes the right choices with caveats due to the hardware. Car models are pretty small, but are still good enough to represent the bigger previews, and the construction also has a zoomed out representation, so the track can be seen at a good overhead. Overall, it looks pretty good. But that's because I haven't spoken about the gameplay. Stunt Rally for the Game Boy suffers in the same place that LEGO Racers for the Game Boy suffers, that being moving too fast and showing too little ahead. I found myself failing a lot more due to the screen space not telegraphing what was ahead of me. It's a problem for handhelds with not a lot of picture to work with, but a problem nonetheless. Aside from slowing down around turns, there was not the ability to skid off the track and recover, simply a binary pass or spin out. It was really annoying because when the previous game excelled in digitizing the original source material, here was a game that was stuck to it. This could have been based on a limitation of how the game was programmed, but it's a removal of a system that assists the person playing, and not providing an alternative solution makes it a lot less satisfying. In the end, I would have to do the race once or twice, learning the track and then with that knowledge knowing when and where to slow down. But the trial and error method of racing does not make it fun. Because you need to rely on memorizing mapless racetracks, it's not exactly mastery, and that makes it not so satisfying. On the bright side, it's actually good that you only need to control the game like a slot car because it allows you to focus, but that's kind of a lame excuse. So if the racing is far from perfect, why did I enjoy it more than the Game Boy version of LEGO Racers? Probably it was because of the building. Whereas extreme concessions were made in order to have a buildable car in the LEGO Racers one, the buildable track of Stunt Rally is as good as you could ask for Game Boy. It really includes everything I enjoyed from the mainline title, even giving you options to add little LEGO city pieces. You could even say that it felt more LEGO this way, giving you more creative freedom to build than the extremely limited option of its sister game. Stacking this game against the others at the time also sheds some light on its niche and shortcomings. Tonka Raceway, which had its own track editor on PC, had no such thing in its transition to portability, and had a series of bigger but clunkier 3D models turned into sprites as cars. On the other hand, Mickey Speedway USA was a very good controlling and good looking racer, not having a track editor but much better in the controls and game feel department. I suppose when it comes down to it, I'm glad I tried this one despite its weaknesses, as it's more emblematic of the game it shares its name with, and it feels just more LEGO-like. The question is, does its uniqueness for the time hold any relevance today? Perhaps to a few people, and perhaps that's good enough. LEGO Racers 2 has an interesting reputation. It's a much sloppier game than its predecessor, and from a matter of more objective metrics, does a lot that makes it worse than LEGO Racers 1. It makes a lot of control-related blunders and doesn't look too graphically impressive, but what makes it so endearing nevertheless is that it understood the single-player strength of LEGO Racers 1, and instead of continuing in the safe kart racing lane, it shifts gears to join the pioneers of its era and pursue being a car-based adventure game. 2001 was still a relatively early time for open-world racing. Its most popular progenitors were arcade-style games such as Carmageddon and Crazy Taxi. The only ones really into the weeds of this genre were Rockstar Games, who only a month after LEGO Racers 2 would release, would drop Grand Theft Auto 3, becoming the envied new style of the sandbox open-world craze. LEGO Racers 2 doesn't go as revolutionary as GTA 3, but what it does do is give a brand new experience to kart racing fans, providing a 3D world instead of staying in a safe option of a menu-selected on-rails racer. This game, however, was not created by High Voltage, the original maker of LEGO Racers 1. For whatever reason, they would not be involved in the sequel, and replacing them would be Attention to Detail. ATD had not only created the LEGO Racers theme park ride as mentioned before, but they were a lot closer to the LEGO Media publishing branch, both being in England, while High Voltage was an American developer from the Midwest. After Rocket Racer is deposed from his position of being the best in the first game, he returns in a new tournament through an interstellar portal. In order to race him, you need to travel amongst the open worlds, giving a little bit of meaning to each locale that you visit. Your character is from the little town of Sandy Bay, and as your first world, you're challenged to race one-on-one with the municipal township. Conceptually and setting-wise, this is great. Sandy Bay has some catchy music and sun-soaked spots and bricky buildings to make it all feel like a little LEGO world. Before you get to each race here, the game allows you to find your bearings and see the island a little. And much like the original LEGO Island, it's a very quaint picture, minus the fever dreams. The open world is certainly the greatest strength of LEGO Racers 2, perhaps even in the fact that it's not your traditional streets and skyscrapers or groomed racetrack of many other racing games. If you see a mountain, you can climb it, and then you can feel free to just tumble right down. The developers certainly knew that this was going to be fun for the player, as each area includes secret bonus stages and important golden bricks to encourage riding around carelessly. There's a sort of sense of humor to it. In a normal racing game, trying to scale up a big cliff would be an absolute no-go. Your big build of a car is never built to climb like this, but here, LEGO Racers 2 is laughing alongside you, and giving you a little treat after snaking your way up a smooth, terraformed terrain. For me at least, it invoked a feeling of playing with a LEGO car in real life, racing it up a wall, or a stair, or a railing. These are toys, and the real-world physics can take the day off. One piece of humor that the game gets a bit wrong is how you communicate with the NPCs. Their dialogue in the story is perfectly serviceable, and they speak in a silly, looping gibberish, but the problem is how long they take to say anything. Prominently on both PS2 and PC, there is a fast-forward button which I constantly fought the urge not to use while trying to get footage. I'm assuming that this slow text speed was meant to help children playing the game read the lines, but the zippy VCR fast-forward effect makes me think that it's almost a sort of joke. It works the first, second, and third time, but this goes on for the entire game, and by the time you hit credits, it really appears to miss the mark. Once you get to the racing, you'll sadly learn about the weakest part of LEGO Racers 2. It's the racing. Right from the get-go, you can start to feel that something feels a bit off from the precision steering, but this becomes a bigger problem when put against another racer. Running into any objects, including drivers, has an incredibly high chance of spinning you out. Once that happens, it's not so much a conflict against other racers, but a conflict against your own car. I actually lost the first race and almost deleted the footage in shame, but I think it bears showing as these instances are what will determine the race's outcomes and usually not the items. Items are not so great either. A good portion of them are combat related, and none of them assist in steering or giving speed boosts. This really does not help in recovering when you're behind, since most of them, save for a single homing missile, assume that the racer is very closely in front of you. There were not even a lot of times where I would hold on to an item longer than a couple of seconds, mainly because most of them gave me no benefit to the race. When I was in first, the only items that would help me in front were an invisibility power or a tornado to slip up the players behind me, but the latter barely ever showed up when I was in first. Where LEGO Racers 1 allowed you to gloat about your wins by warping ahead and lapping people in last, being in first is actually pretty boring, and my only concern was that I would hit an obstacle wrong and completely botch the race. Sandy Bay probably suffers the most from the item problem because it's one-on-one racing, but things get a bit better, but not by much when you head to the next worlds. Each travel method is kitted with its own transportation options of real LEGO sets. The thing about this is that they don't have the means to take your car with you, so that means that you'll have to get a new one. The most fundamental aspect that makes it still feel LEGO is building, and I can happily say that building a car is still very fun. There may be a little less to choose from in the weird category, meaning no more spears and treasure chests on your car, but those are replaced with nice substitutes and chassis. The new building system took some getting used to, but once you get the hang of it, it's still pretty intuitive. The one addition and slight limitation is how many bricks you can have on your car. My guess is a part of this is for performance reasons, but the other part is for the destructibility. During races, damage to your car poses a much greater threat, as too many hits will see your little LEGO person hoofing it on their tiny legs. If this happens, it's likely you won't win the race after, but it's funny when it happens to you and satisfying when you do it to opponents. Upon going to a new world, you can choose whichever race you want to do in any order you like. This is pretty neat, and if you're having trouble in one race, you can always just go to another and come back to it. The trade-off, however, is that to have this luxury, you need to select these races in the hub world. None of the hub worlds are very good, however. I can't tell if there was a point where they expected you to enter these on foot at one time during development, but whatever the intention, the spaces are far too cramped to easily manage your car here. What is a nice refresher though is that you always have the opportunity between races to go and explore in the open worlds. I'm really curious why the change from starting missions in the first world map changed to hubs, because I can't stress enough how fun it is to explore these locations. Each of them provides some lovely intrinsic and extrinsic methods of play. Hunting for gold bricks, finding bonus games, or simply looking at a piece of terrain and seeing if you can unleash your inner mountain goat. For as mediocre or bad as the racing gets, the expression of adventuring in your car is something that LEGO Racers 2 excels at, to a point where you start to forget it's a racing game, as strange as it sounds. Backing up a bit, the previously mentioned bonus levels are pretty fun as well. For the most part, it just comes down to collecting something and then bringing it to another location, but the game expands on it each world you go to. For the first go, it's a crazy taxi-style minigame, with a pretty simple goal of locating townspeople to different landmarks. The next two worlds feature you picking up multiple items and dropping them off at other points, while avoiding malicious drivers. Getting to the ice world sees you picking up balloons, and with each one picked up, your car becomes lighter until it just gets carried away. It's a small touch likely done by a team strapped for time, but I really appreciate the effort put in. Another unique difficulty change is with some of the bosses. The first is nothing too special, just a better racer in the form of Sam Sinister, but going to Mars sees you racing an indestructible mech, and going to the Arctic has you racing against a monster called the Berg, who litters the track with obstacles, or icicles. Really the same thing. While I would have liked these bosses to actually compete in circuits and make it feel like I was building a rivalry with them, these anticipated boss levels do a solid job in presenting challenges to the player. The exception of this is the final boss, who is Rocket Racer. Getting to the final area, Zalax perhaps sets your expectations pretty high. The world map feels quite a bit smaller, but it's a place that has some memorable tracks, giving a change of pace to feeling more like a quick action kart racer. In the presentation as well, all your races are encircled in a large racetrack, which you can't access, making the lead up to the race even more enticing. I'm sad to say, however, that the solo race is basically just a NASCAR track with walls. Rocket is fast but still damageable, unlike the last two bosses. He doesn't really have any gimmicks like constantly warping in LEGO Racers 1, and the track almost brings no strategy or awe to you as you go around something so visually uninteresting. The reason you go to different worlds of LEGO Racers 2 is because at the start, your car doesn't have the means to take on Rocket Racer. I think if even there was an unwinnable race at the beginning against the champion, it would build a more satisfying conclusion to best him here. Instead, it's just a very anticlimactic ending. I'm almost positive that this was not the final race that the developers intended, and it seems like the poster child of a turbulent or rushed development. About 30 ATD employees worked on the game, but they also had to release a game the previous year as well for the PlayStation 1 and PC. This was the first time developing for the PlayStation 2, and on top of this, they were still responsible for creating the LEGO Racers theme park ride. You could make the argument that this was the pre-production for LEGO Racers 2, but given the context, it sounded like another liability that had to be fixed and maintained for the Legoland park. I say all this because while LEGO Racers has some glaring flaws, there are a lot of understandable ones. It doesn't excuse the poor gameplay because, at the end of the day, it was a product as well as a work of art. But looking in retrospect, you start to see a clearer picture of how this game probably needed more time in the oven. This game still does succeed in creating some very imaginative worlds, where the player can still build and express themselves. It successfully takes the player from a quaint seaside town to a faraway racing planet. It has ideas, and while none of them fully stick the landing, it's ambitious and makes you wonder what the next game would be like. After all, LEGO Racers 3 wouldn't take too long to come out, right? There are positive things I can say about LEGO Racers 2 for the Game Boy Advance. It's an overall improvement to the handheld version of LEGO Racers 1, and that it's playable and that you can read the road a lot better. There are some cute little pre-renders of LEGO people and villages surrounding the world, including a tiny populated sandy bay. The game is developed by Pocket Studio, and this was their highest rated game. Granted, a 66% Moby game score is not high, but looking on the bright side, it's better than the average 48% score of their 10-game catalog. There you have it. There are some good things to say about this game. The problem is, having good things to say about a game doesn't necessarily mean that the game is good. And frankly, good is not a word I would use for encompassing LEGO Racers 2 on the GBA. On a basic note, the racing is alright. Based upon Mode 7 style, the console showed off in Super Mario Kart Super Circuit and F-Zero Maximum Velocity, LEGO Racers 2 is a budget-level attempt to replicate the same flavor. It's your overall standard affair, the items are alright, they use bricks like coins in Mario Kart to dictate the top speed of your car, the drifting mechanic is maybe even a small step above Super Circuits. But pretty much after you leave Sandy Bay, the bigger flaws in the game start to show. Like the Game Boy Color version, there is no on-screen map of the racetrack, so while you can at least see a bit in front of you, you still are at the mercy of the turn signals and your memory to know what's coming up next. The balancing of the worlds are also really strange, with Mars being the most brutal area more than the following two worlds ever are because the only barriers to the track are lava pits. This rings into a more weird component, which is the difficulty. LEGO Racers 2 is relatively hard, and while there's nothing wrong with a little bit of difficulty, I don't know how I gel with the game's failure systems. Much akin to the console and PC version, each race is its own unique level that you can choose in any order. LEGO Racers 2 adopts the Talladega Nights philosophy that if you ain't first, you're last, and so placing anything else will do absolutely nothing for you. I personally prefer a series of races, so that if you come second, it's not a definite win or lose, and you can have hope that you will do better in the next race. Like the console and PC version, the non-linearity of races does help. What I think makes it more apparent on the Game Boy version is just how picky about error it gets. For me, if I made 2 to 3 medium mistakes, there was a slim chance of coming in first. I would likely just hit the start button and reset the race because there was no point of finishing it. On the other hand, perhaps these single races are okay, as I would hate to have lost my placement after a glitch changed my controls, careening me into the fiery lakes of Mars. Even though the gameplay is a step up from portable LEGO Racers 1, the building aspect is a step down. You can still create your own minifig, but the only time you'll see them is when they stand awkwardly on the winner's podium, next to swimsuit-clad women. I know this was a common practice of the time for racing, and I should have some finger-wagging as I did for King Kahooka, but I can't take this seriously. Beach babes aside, this is the best you'll get when it comes to player representation, as although you have a character who walks around the overworld, it accounts for none of your cosmetic choices. The true step down of player expression is your race car. You cannot build a car, you cannot choose between options of cars, you are stuck with the same car for the entirety of the game, so you better get used to driving it. This and the missing exploration of the world really makes the whole thing feel like a pointless exercise. It becomes so detached from the PS2 and PC game that the story feels like the only connecting tissue, which to its credit, it copies verbatim. I like to see the intention behind games, so even if they aren't hidden gems, you can still excavate the small shiny pebbles in them that might look cool if you put them on a shelf and look at them from time to time. However, nothing really comes in and saves the package from being a disappointing LEGO game. It's the most subtractive of LEGO elements that we've seen in any of the game series thus far, and the pre-rendered still images can only go so far as to make you imagine you're playing with digital bricks. LEGO Racers 2 isn't an awful game, but it never gives you reason to play it over any other good Game Boy Advance racing title. They are either far better in the sense of the gameplay, or technologically more interesting. Other than some light LEGO imagery, it includes no creative or constructive play. It makes relative sense as to how it ended up like this. Pocket Studios had only made 2 games before this, and its only other Game Boy Advance title was a port of arcade games from the early 80s. Less than a month after LEGO Racers 2, the team would also need to ship Army Men Operation Green, meaning this likely wasn't the sole focus of the studio during development. It feels like just another assignment to a small and I imagine stressed group of programmers and artists. A game that was worked on until Pencils Down was called, and then it was on to the next one. If you're still with me, I appreciate your time, as I imagine some might skip this chapter, since, after all, it's just a LEGO Racers game on the Game Boy. Who really cares? Whether this was the intent or not, that feels like the attitude of the package when you play this game. As modern LEGO stands, a large portion of its identity has been far more on mimicking the company that it keeps, rather than selling its own iconography. In more recent years, things have been better in the video game department with LEGO Builder's Journey and LEGO Brick Tales. But from 2002 to 2012, there was a 10-year gap for traditional multi-platform LEGO games that didn't feature famous movie licenses. An exception to this rule was the LEGO Technic line, a form of LEGO that took more inspiration from Erector set toys than the LEGO Group's brick system. Famously, one of the LEGO Group's successes and saviors in the early 2000s was found in the popular Bionicle line, which created its own, mostly unique world. The success of the toy line brought in a lot of cross-media promotion with comics, movies, and even its own lore-infused web games. Bionicle was a hit, but it wasn't the only LEGO Technic universe the company was trying to get off the ground. Times were also changing internally, with the name of LEGO Media Publishing going to LEGO Software in 2000, then LEGO Interactive 2 years later after co-publishing a deal with the big industry name Electronic Arts. Instead of creating LEGO Racers 3, the team at Attention to Detail were tasked to create Drome Racers to go along with the toy line of the same name. Drome Racers isn't a good game, nor is it a bad game, but overall it's an unimaginative game, and because it lacks that inventive pizzazz, it barely even feels like it's LEGO. The issues, in a way, start at the root of the inspiration. Drome Racers takes place in the near future of 2015, where a mysterious patron, Dromulus, hosts the races in a great terraformed megaspace known as the Drome. The manual to the game alludes to the idea that teams race for their survival, and that there are other unique stories behind each team, but it's barely expanded upon and leaves a lot to the player to just guess at what it all means. The most depth to the plot the series ever had was a 13-minute movie that was played at the Legoland Park titled LEGO Racers 4D. In truth, it really just feels like an early 2000s animation with LEGO and Drome Racers lore being added in after the fact. Drome Racers doesn't really have time to elaborate because it's actually just one of 3 marketed series lumped together. In LEGO Magazine, the most heavily featured sets were the ones from the game, but Fighting for Page Space were the traditional LEGO sets only loosely based on this, and promotional collaborations with Williams Formula 1. This was probably a way of reaching out to multiple demographics, but they all just get in the way of each other, especially when Drome Racers is trying to sell its own unique brand, and its box sets don't even have the courage to show off the name. It really is a half-hearted attempt when you compare it to Bionicle. Real sets aside, you can see that they're going for a different demographic with this game than LEGO Racers 2, which isn't bad, it's just different. Starting the game, the first race you'll actually be encouraged to do is drag racing, a race where you drive in a straight line and manually switch gears to prevent your car from exploding. If this doesn't sound fun to you, you're probably not a big car person. I wouldn't consider myself a big car person either. Thankfully, these are merely optional races in order to see how you fare on the starting lineup, a similar process on how they do it in qualifying for Formula 1. Getting into the Drome, we see that the racing is built off the work done in the LEGO Racers 2 engine. It still has quite a few flaws from LEGO Racers 2, but has been incrementally improved. Steering your car feels more grounded, but spinouts can still occur at high speeds, so you have to be realistic in how you drive. The problem is that realism matches poorly with the items, which will then hit you a lot harder because of this kinetic impact. An item in Mario Kart might be annoying, but for the most part it's still slapstick fun. But they are more frustrating in a game that tries to be more serious and tonally competitive. Ironically, the items are improved, allowing for speed boosts, and are in smaller environments for better effect. None of it is groundbreakingly different, but it's far more favorable than what you would see in LEGO Racers 2, and certainly not bad. The tracks of Drome Racers aren't too shabby either, with most of them taking place in some standard but nice looking terrain, but there are some stunners such as a crowd-pleasing aquatic glass tunnel or a futuristic city. All of these tracks are reused in some way, but a lot of them have different passages that open up to different routes or some dynamic event. You also have the option to pick from a couple of different cars, all digitized Technic sets. And although there are not a ton of them, they do have neat designs and are akin to Stunt Rally in that they have very different handling and speeds. The problem is that there feels to be an eerie lacking of context to these places and cars, despite there being a Drome tower always in the background. The tracks are more or less empty of spectators, the cars of your opponents say nothing about their expression or style, and the only characters you get to talk with are the people in the garage, and they're one-dimensional and wooden. These characters also have to do the dry and unfortunate work of telling you instead of showing you what your other competing racers are like. It's a neat concept to build beefs with other racers, and it's something that the 4D movie focused on as its main plot, but the presentation around it sadly makes it dull. As you go through the game, you'll have the option to race them one-on-one, and your mentor-type Rocket or Mechanic Chicane will tell you about how perilous these other racers are, and then you'll go face them on the same tracks you likely just raced on. These rivals will never speak to you before or after the race, so it's just presented as if you're doing the same thing again against one more challenging car. There's not even really an ending, just a personal completion indicator that you raced everyone and did all the cups. But I didn't even know who anyone was! A point that constantly came up to me while playing was how something so foreign such as Bionicle could still favorably feel like LEGO when Drome racers failed to do so. I certainly had my biases of being a massive fan of Bionicle as a kid, but I think it's truthfully that this game has a lack of character. Characters are the true vehicles to stories, and taking the role of the character in play is a way that we empathetically connect with them. Whether you are playing a role of a Toa on the quest for the Mask of Light, or saving a man from a river in LEGO City, you lend your imagination to the solution of these quests, and it's up to you to play it by the book or completely wing it to your own prerogative. It's the secret sauce that makes LEGO so enticing, to be as ironclad or loose with your imagination, and not getting in the way of either option. Video games can't be as limitless as imagination, but what they can do is entertain a concept and sell you on becoming a character in its world, letting its atmosphere help your mind fill in the blanks. Drome Racers has me grasping for something that I can emotionally feel engaged with how little atmosphere it has. It reacts so flatly to the actions of the player, such as winning races, and lacks any real attempt to explain the setting and characters, to a point of making you feel bad trying to pretend that your character is anything more than a guy in a car. It's not that these vehicles don't look cool, but they don't make me ask the who, what, where, how, why that vehicles in something like LEGO Racers do. It doesn't help that these cars only have helmeted, unmoving humanoids in their cockpits. But really, what did the devs have to go off of since the Technic minifigures had been retired 2 years before? According to former attention to detail developer Simon Goodwin, Drome Racers was allegedly in a more complete state 6 months out of development than its actual release, but due to corporate mandated change, the final product was less than what the team had originally wanted. A Nintendo GameCube port of the game launched later with a car battle option, but I feel like there was much more ambition to it than just that. These were still the imaginative minds of LEGO Racers 2, a flawed game, but a game that had big ideas. Attention to Detail would start working on the next LEGO Racers game, but by that point the studio was in a financial dilemma and would close its doors after Drome Racers' release. I know it's bad to dwell on what a game isn't instead of what it is, but I think the problem there is that it's so forgettable that my mind can't help but wander and wonder what it wanted to be. It's just an okay racing game, leaning into a story it barely tells, and unsure if it's an item-based racer or a realistic racer. It's the result of a time where the LEGO Group was in crisis knowing even what it was. This was the era of Galador and Jack Stone, where the LEGO Group would bet significant sums of its dwindling money on new projects with little market research, only to see them crash and burn. Drome Racers feels like one of those failures. A misguided game that's not even that bad, but is the byproduct of incoherent choices. It is with a heavy heart that I tell you that Drome Racers for the Game Boy Advance is a very good video game. It controls and performs far better than most GBA racing games I've played. Its art style nostalgically beckons to classics like Virtua Racer and Stunt Race FX, and the overall gameplay trumps the console version to where I started to care even about the drag races. Well, almost. After 3 handheld games that went from just okay to very disappointing, it's unfortunate that the least LEGO game of all is by far the best one. As mentioned before, being disappointed in what something is not is a dangerous thing, so my advice is then to pretend that this game isn't published by LEGO. Look away from the logo on the cartridge, pay no heed to the slight Technic design, toast to the Danish patrons of Billund who made this lovely game happen, then drink to forget that it was they who did so. Dramatics aside, Drome Racers is a very good representation of what it is on console, with basically every car and race type in the game. The racetracks themselves are different and, for my money, better dispersed in the variety department. In a way that also creatively diverges, the game asks you to pick one of the teams of its backstory to race for. It doesn't give you different stories a la Ridge Racer Type 4, but it does give you different cars to race with, and provides a sense of extra completion if you want to win the Grand Prix with all the teams. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone other than completionists, and eventually all the cars will control the same through upgrades, but choosing a team is a tiny gesture that feels like the game is at least interested in acknowledging the universe. If you follow the train of thought that LEGO Magazine seems to imply, it's a series that does make you root for a team, appreciate unique cars, and then qualify and race them like a proper fan of Formula 1 racing. It's a good first step, but sadly it never goes further. You can start to see though that if they built more onto this universe similar to Nintendo's F-Zero, how this might be a slow pathway to another market of maturing LEGO fans. The controls are excellent, with noticeable differences between on- and off-road cars, with drag races giving better tutorials and not slapping you on the wrist with an exploding car when you do it wrong. Items are still here, but they don't risk ruining the whole race or your day, as it leans into a more arcade style. For that reason then, there are also plenty of speed boosting items around the track, giving more opportunities to make you feel like a speed demon without worry. And of course you have the visuals. The Game Boy Advance had a small helping of 3D games, but it did so with difficulty. The Game Boy Advance hardware was built with mainly 2D in mind, and only had the ability to store a fraction of the data that an early 3D console could. Yet still, somehow here these games were, defying the limitations, but usually at the cost of visuals and performance. Somehow though, Drome Racers actually looks and plays really well, and the frame rate is solid. The action on the screen is readable and clean, likely due to its smart decision to avoid texture mapping where it could. And speaking of readability, there's a map of the track on the screen, and I audibly shouted with joy when I first saw it. Overall, it's a solid technical achievement, and it still plays well, but sadly it doesn't have enough going for it that makes a casual gamer feel connected to pick it up. It still has no story, and other racers don't have any personalities to make me imagine who's in the cockpit of the enemy cars. I don't blame the developer Rockstar Leeds for this problem though. It's more so that Drome Racers the franchise never seemed to have a vibrant enough world to build with. It's a good game with a baseless identity. For the topic of this video and the family of games it belongs to, it's tragic. It's tragic that a name like Drome Racers would not draw the attention of potential buyers the same way LEGO Racers would. It's still tragic that even while making this video, I questioned whether or not I should include it or bring it up just because of how little it felt like LEGO, and I guess it's tragic that even though I didn't feel like it was still LEGO. It appeared that the company that willed this to being had lost what it meant to make something feel like itself. This wasn't the last LEGO game behind the wheel, but it would be the last exclusively substantial one for a long time. There would be a couple of cell phone games, a mini-game in LEGO's unsuccessful MMO, and a few unfinished attempts that never saw the light of day, but the end result would be that the LEGO Group was not in the means to experiment when righting itself from near bankruptcy. 2005 would see a new style of LEGO game come about, though. One with simple but solid gameplay, safe but clever humor, and a formula that would apply to any number of IPs and projects. On one side of the 6th console generation, LEGO was lost at what to do with its game division, and by the end of it, it was critically and commercially at the best place it had ever been. Why fix what wasn't broken? For the next 10 years, the LEGO racing toy line sat in a quiet, comfortable niche. Primarily, the sets made by LEGO would either be an original small-scale style car, or a larger model of a licensed or realistic-looking vehicle, usually for older collectors which had the shelf space and spending habits to match it. LEGO was now in a much better state than they had been in the early 2000s, and a lot of its big sellers had followed the lucrative movie tie-in market to create some great sets, with TT Games usually helming a successful video game adaptation. It would be two shakeups that would herald the return of LEGO racing. The first was the LEGO Movie. Keeping it brief, the LEGO Movie accomplished everything it wanted to do and more, representing the community of LEGO in every way possible, while still accomplishing the level of LEGO humor that had always run with the lightheartedness of its sets. It looked absolutely beautiful, mimicking the stop-motion styles that were emblematic of hobbyists, to make the movie feel more like you were playing it instead of watching it. The entire style of the film just oozed with love and detail, far better than any movie based on a toy. And LEGO was quick to implement the success of the film and adopt its catchphrases and terms into public marketing. A little over 10 years after a looming bankruptcy, the LEGO Group as a brand was stronger, better, and more in tune with itself than it had ever been before. The second sign came only a year later, with the birth of LEGO Speed Champions. 2015's Speed Champion line was a return to LEGO racing, in a trend that followed the success of movie tie-ins, but instead of following films, it pursued real-world racing. Partnering again with deluxe car companies, the LEGO Group made the marriage of these vehicles with LEGO's system and minifigures more permanent by just mainly changing its size. Instead of the Matchbox micro size or tall RC and shelf models, Speed Champions were made to be medium builds, like LEGO Racers and Stunt Rally cars of old, and big enough that you could fit a banana yellow minifigure in it for scale. It could be argued in some ways that the line stagnated the creativity of LEGO racing, basing its cars only on those that had big names behind it. But with this new style came new fans, and as sales would show, Speed Champions line quickly became a favorite of car enthusiasts, collectors, and birthday gift recipients. This is the note on which LEGO racing would return. Forza Horizon 4 LEGO Speed Champions is a DLC expansion grafted onto an already solid racing game. However, it's thorough enough in its 7 hours of content that makes it feel like its own unique game, and so polished to be indicative of what LEGO racing could look like in the modern era. I had never really played a Forza game before, and while I still haven't played a lot of it, much like Speed Champions LEGO sets, its appeal is an alluring gateway drug to get you invested into the world of real-life automobiles. But that's a story for another time, though. The introduction that LEGO Speed Champions starts with is par for the course of Forza Horizon's games, meaning, by reputation, it's absolutely fantastic. The sense of speed mixed with different cars you're teased with in the game make for invigorating fun on the road with dashes of LEGO-style humor. Bringing you out to the exclusive LEGO Speed Champions World Speed Valley, the terrain is a phenomenal mix of bricks and real-life terrain. As the name suggests, it's a Forza game first and a LEGO game second, so while the terrain is mostly realistic foliage and rocks, scattered around are loads of LEGO cities, stadiums, and sets. They probably could have gotten away with less without criticism, but you only need to drive through the streets of Brickchester City to know that this was a labor of love. I will say they may have perhaps done too good a job as racing with real cars in the Speed Champions area feels a little bit blasphemous. Considering there are only 4 LEGO cars for a large part of the experience, and only one of them is decent at off-road driving, the lack of variety does make you resort to pulling from the buffet of cars from the base game. This complaint may be my own personal stubbornness to change, and I can concede that to others, it could very well be interpreted as a crossover like one might do with their toys when they're younger. One hill I will die on, however, is that the player character does stick out like a sore thumb in LEGO Speed Valley. In a place where all the crowds are minifigures, and even your LEGO car driver is a minifigure, anytime your Forza avatar shows up, it almost ruins the feng shui of the atmosphere, and not because I constantly set him to do somersaults. On the topic of LEGO environments, your goal of the DLC is to fulfill the Ed Sheeran dream of constructing a LEGO home on the festival premises, along with unlocking the cars associated with the DLC. To do this, you need to acquire LEGO bricks that are awarded after completing various tasks. Some tasks are easier or harder than others, and will give you different amounts of bricks based on the difficulty. Whether it's a defined race, smashing destructible environments, or a task to reach one point of the map to the other in a certain amount of time, the fact that this is all in the same open valley really feels like an extension of what LEGO Racers 2 was getting up to back in 2001. Although the game does not allow you to build any cars or sets manually, the sandbox expression of choosing a car to fulfill tasks still does give the game enough of a LEGO-like quality to be on the same philosophical wavelength of imaginative play. There comes a part of criticism to this that becomes difficult when considering what you might want the game to do as a LEGO fan and what it can do as DLC. Although the goal of this is to assemble a house, you can't really add your own flourishes, and you certainly cannot build it yourself. Cars come to you fully assembled, so while a building animation might have been nice, it was likely just not in the cards. Playground Games created the Speed Champions DLC in the span of 6 months in 2019. However, with the higher fidelity of the Xbox One compared to the PlayStation 2, 6 months is not a lot of runway for development time. Speed Champions may also be divisive for some in how it represents the LEGO brand as more sterile and safe. Missions will be about rapidly racing around a motorsport track and not a sitcom quest to find someone's missing pair of pants. Being a collaboration between developer Playground Games, the LEGO Group, and prestigious car companies that lend their licenses to vehicles, commentary about the wacky side of LEGO is kept to a minimum, with humor styles more about assembling real-life LEGO car models rather than the cheeky social commentary of the Lord and Miller movie. Perhaps due to this presentation, it feels like a more naked celebration of a product than an experience of using LEGO, focusing on the playing and obtaining, and not so much the building. It's a game that caters to car fans and those who want to build models and display it on their collector's shelves. You could make the cynical argument that this is a consumerist fantasy, but cars are not something that most people have the luxury to collect, and for younger audiences, the act of driving itself isn't even tangible. This is why LEGO Speed Champions is so popular. It's a way of possessing a car you could never drive. And Forza Horizons is a modern-day fantasy game, about driving realistic cars in an unrealistic context. Automobile pandering is not a sin of Forza Horizons LEGO Speed Champions. Again, it is exactly what it says it is. Nevertheless, it did however have to deal with the hordes of LEGO fans who had waited 18 years and were clamoring for anything remotely close to the games that had come before. Being a part of that camp and one who only really played arcade-style racers, I would say the best way to appreciate this is to let it be an excuse of trying a different racing genre. Experiment on this being a bridge to understanding a different side of the hobby. Have fun with the stunt ramps, but take the time to understand the challenging yet satisfying handling, and even if you're willing, pick out a car that isn't made of LEGO and take it out for a spin. I think you'll be glad you did. Or at least, do it while you can. On June 25th, 2024, Playground Games announced that the purchasing of Forza Horizons 4 will no longer be available as of December 15th, due to licensing issues. You can still get LEGO Speed Champions through the Ultimate Edition, but once that timeline expires, the availability will no longer be possible. It's a bit of an inevitability that with so many real cars, music licenses, and other trademarks, the game will no longer be in the legal means to be distributed. And in that lies a scary problem that the LEGO brand has even outside of racing. If LEGO's iconic sets and characters are all popular tie-ins of other properties, what will that mean for revisiting LEGO's past? Sure, you can reference the LEGO Movie, it's a great film, but a 24/7 radio station for Everything is Awesome will eventually make you crave something different if you don't bring something new to the table. In order for the LEGO Group to maintain a modern identity and legacy for its future, they would have to not just rely on big brands and make something that was uniquely, first and foremost, LEGO. The phrase that time has not been kind to it usually appears when regarding something that has not fared well over months or years. However, LEGO 2K Drive fit that description the day it released. This wasn't because LEGO 2K Drive looked dated or played badly, but rather, in its return to the familiar, it had to take on all the reputation and expectation of the LEGO racing franchise. Fans had waited for a new LEGO racing installment longer than Half-Life fans had waited for their next game. This anticipation was nothing short of awaiting a return of the king, LEGO Racers 3 in all but name. LEGO Speed Champions was excused by some because it was DLC, but the release of an independent LEGO racing game with kart racing elements meant that this was it, and it better be done right. LEGO 2K Drive acknowledges LEGO Racers 1 and 2 in some brilliant ways. The spirit of those games are held tightly to its heart, but it isn't the heart itself. This game had the impossible task of fulfilling 2 decades of wishes to frothing at the mouth fans, and it addresses them politely but indirectly. It's interested in pleasing people, but by having a fun game and not a full replication of what came before. It builds on the elements of its predecessors, but instead of following the instructions, it diverts into its own creative flares. It wants to be an alternative build, and by staying true to itself, it just might be the best LEGO game ever made. The intro opens well, with a 1-2 punch of gameplay and familiar aromas of LEGO humor from the movies, but also taking inspiration from the other influences like the TT LEGO games. It's a sign of quality writing that never dampens during its 10-hour story mode. It's not taking itself too seriously, but that's kind of what I want from a LEGO game. When you get behind the wheel, it's certainly less bombastic than Forza Horizon's opening, but almost nothing is, and I assume it's to onboard the perhaps less experienced demographic. This is just a starting Sunday drive, and it isn't the real introduction, as within 60 seconds of giving you controls, you're free to play and get lost in the tutorial world of Brick Acres. If you want to move along with the story, the tutorial levels are literally right down the street, but I suspect many will dive into the content of this relatively small area for almost an hour or more, because LEGO 2K Drive is not just a game about racing, but finding any and all creative ways you can pilot a LEGO vehicle. I say vehicle as well because LEGO 2K Drive adapts the shifting control styles of Sonic Racing Transformed to constantly keep the gameplay fresh and the player in control. If you're on the road, the car will be a sleek speedster, but if you find yourself in the mud, the vehicle will switch to an appropriate off-road option. And even if you go into the water, there's a floatier, wave-affected option of a boat. The thing is, they're not trying to be like the real-world counterparts of these. They're not like the light realism car equivalents of Forza, or the lighter but still weighted automobiles of a kart racer. They drive as if you're handling a LEGO set. Whereas LEGO Racers 1 and 2 still adhere to driving and heaviness of the genre's inspiration, 2K Drive feels much more like a toy, and with the lack of its assumed heft, it makes for more prolonged airtime and believable destructibility. It follows much more to the example of Rocket League, with a boost jump mechanic to boot. I would even go as far to say as it handles more accurately to that game than Fortnite's own spin-off, Rocket Racing. I digress, however. To complement this realistic LEGO control, the worlds of 2K Drive are peppered with real-world artifacts, beckoning you to consider how you might have imagined the terrain of your house as a racetrack when you played with bricks on the floor. It continues as well with the climbable spirit of LEGO Racers 2 by not just having these items as set dressing, but actively creating challenges around them. Ride up the water hose, climb up the cat tree, push an egg into a skillet, who cares? It would all be very well and good if this was just intrinsic wish fulfillment, but the devs were clever enough to know that people would want to do this and added extrinsic rewards. Without any loading screens, there are a multitude of time-based challenges waiting around the world to be activated, and that vary from performing certain maneuvers or just gunning it around specific impromptu tracks. These types of things have been in other games, but the variety is incredibly robust. Not to mention, resetting them is stupefyingly convenient, especially with the almost instant load times. For larger bonus games, you also have a pretty solid selection like robot zombies, tower defense missions, and more traditional pick-up drop-off minigames. Even outside of the designated activities, 2K Drive still wants you to vehemently experiment and play with the things that it's made, and so it takes great pleasure in creating discoverable rewards for the purely curious and those seeking to get something tangible out of it. Scattered around the landscapes and under every nook and cranny, there is likely a LEGO person or visual gag waiting to grab your attention. These can be visual gags like an army of cop cars around a donut shop, but they can also get into the LEGO Island territory of weird with an imposter alien community of Big Butte County and their head of crops. Complementing this then are the collectible boons in cash money and experience that you gain from going to new areas. Add this to the trinket collecting, and it also provides a very Banjo-Kazooie Assassin's Creed comfort food collectathon style. Something to also bring up is the co-op multiplayer, which is also really good. You can play pretty much the whole game split screen, and aside from races and minigames, you have the ability to collect and run challenges independent of one another. It also performs really well on consoles like the PS5, with only the Nintendo Switch notably struggling a bit, but still, quite playable if that's the option you choose. Expectedly, racing takes up a large portion of the main story's activities, and they do a great job at making things different and fresh. On the mechanical levels, 2K Drive borrows the items and battling from car racing, but also asks the player to master handling of its tracks. The beautiful thing is, it puts both systems together in a way that forces them to cooperate and creates a stronger experience because of it. Tracks will range in difficulty, but for the most part they do well in making you change to at least 2 vehicle types depending on the race. Aside from long grass hazards, building hazards, and sometimes shark and alligator hazards, the game will heavily incentivize braking and drifting. That is a bit more of an advanced level than a drive around the world of Mario Kart. Drifting rewards you with a speed meter boost, so it's a fun dance of managing when you need to use it and when it's safe to get more of it. Add this to the aforementioned jumping, and you have the ability with its boosting to take a lot of shortcuts. The items are mostly safe but enjoyable. You have an EMP shield, a translucent ghost power, but visual concepts still included some real winners, such as a spider trap that obstructs your screen and makes you spam the jump button to invoke that "get it off of me" energy. Meeting the kart racing crowd in the middle, items are placed in a similar way to LEGO Racers, also including random options as well. A track may have item pickups like missiles visible to take, but harder to acquire items like the fruit gun might be placed in a more contentious location. There are still mystery boxes that hold the potential to grant the LEGO Racers 1 warp, but the game leaves that up to the player to decide which they want to take. Like LEGO Racers 2, however, your vehicle will take damage based on hard collisions or damage from items, so the cure for crashing and burning is to crash and burn into other things. Let me explain. The developers of this game must have been paying some very close attention to how people played LEGO Speed Champions, because all I ever wanted to do while free roaming was smash through breakable LEGO scenery. Well, here is more of that system, now with a gamified incentive to do so. Driving into destructible environments not only gives you bricks back to your car, but also gives your car a further speed boost ability. The game then is constantly tempting you to leave the safety of the main strip and venture out to the more perilous sides, at a point where you're more likely to gamble your safety of spinning out. There are also personal modifiers, but these are just toppings of an already iced cake, so while they are neat and change things a little, it's never really enough to drastically change the outcome of a race, but still provide a way to tune beyond the general stats. You compete in these races from the story to make your way to the renowned Sky Cup, and to do so you have to gather enough flags from different denizens of the game's multiple worlds. Interestingly, 2K Drive doesn't phone in any legacy sets, but like LEGO Stunt Rally, creates its own personas and kits them with their own particular rides. It could be that aside from sets like Ninjago, the LEGO group doesn't have as many long-running reoccurring characters, but I think the main reason is that it serves the game better and more creatively to make these drivers unique and new. Instead of a discontinued character like Johnny Thunder having a car try to match their personality, you have a character that feels like they were built specifically for the cars that they drive, and the open worlds that they race in. Once you get to their part of the world, each character feels like a microboss of their specific biome, with the other sidekick racers also having vehicles and names that go with the theme. Although each race is a bite-sized jaunt in the story mode, the game still provides additional opportunities for circuits and time trials outside of this, featuring all of the other unique characters. My problems with previous games giving a binary win-lose scenario were corrected here as well. Although you still need to win first in every race, any attempt here is awarded with currency and experience. Overall, 2K Drive looks to satisfy its player base, but some may be marred by the philosophy that it's not willing to concede on. If you are coming here looking for a historic LEGO set around your racetrack, that's just not what 2K Drive is here to do. It's taken a look and seen that converting fictitious locations of an IP to a racing format is old hat, and that LEGO is the only toy that encourages you to take apart and remix its sets. For that reason, it'd rather not carry the baggage of adhering to set instructions, and so it comes with a clean slate and then asks you to add to its new scribblings. Probably the most classic return to LEGO racers is the ability to make your own vehicle. And though it may be intimidating at first, it's slightly insane how dedicated to the building system the developers were. As not to overwhelm the player, the first time you're in the garage, you'll simply be shown how to color your car because there's just too many options. Once you get past the shocking variety, you'll find that this is pretty much a build-anything workshop. Bricks range from a wide library and even allow you to use the Technic system along with it. Movement of pieces is easy, correcting errors is simple, and there are quite a few dynamic pieces like spinning turbines if you want to be fancy. My only immediate complaint was that you couldn't put a musket on your car like in LEGO Racers 1, and as an alternative, I just made my car into a musket instead, and that will suffice, I suppose. Sadly, you can't create a character, but there are a large option of minifigures to choose from. As I started to collect and purchase new minifigures, I had the urge to get them a matching vehicle. Sometimes I would buy them from the Emporium with money I had earned in-game, but other times I would go into the garage and make my own option. As an example, after acquiring this fine gentleman and judging him by his garb and name, it was only proper to make him a pizza car to fit his vocation. You also do unlock vehicles as you play through the story, ranging from some bizarre ones to even McLaren cars, giving a nod to the Speed Champions side. But some unlocks are awarded in a way that might furrow some brows. Some might be wary of 2K Drive because of the name, and they would be right to do so. To any who have played 2K games in the past, especially NBA 2K, they can be incredible games but are held hostage by its predatory microtransaction systems. As an example, NBA 2K makes your player objectively worse than the competition, going as far as to intentionally having poor game balance and matchmaking to further push you to spend. When I saw the trailer, my internal cheering turned into groaning at the unveiling of 3 separate versions, clearly upselling components that would be locked away in premium tiers. While I think they held off a bit more on the pay-to-win elements, likely due to potential controversy of doing this to children, there are, however, the eerily familiar microtransaction methods that are popular in free-to-play games these players enjoy, like Rocket League and Fortnite. It sadly wasn't a surprise that this existed either, as the CEO of 2K's parent company receives stock bonuses based on the success of microtransaction purchases of company games. Thankfully, this is where the beauty of LEGO 2K Drive comes in. Perhaps by the publisher's underestimation of the tools that it gives or the creative tenacity of LEGO fans, LEGO 2K Drive beats the pants off its own microtransaction system to a point where it can be conveniently forgotten in most places. As I mentioned before, the car building in LEGO 2K Drive is remarkably good, and alongside this is the ability to share your creations with others that came in an update shortly after launch. It's not that the cars made by the developers are bad, but the creativity of the online community just obliterates its premium competition with what it's allowed to create. Where a company like Visual Concepts is held by the license restraints of 2K and the guidelines of LEGO, within only a few minutes of searching, I had found the community-built pod racer from Star Wars Episode 1, and I could zoom around Big Butte like it was the Mos Espa Raceway. The game still does have annoyances with the DLC, specifically in the Battle Pass holding hostage new car chassis, LEGO bricks, and even removing the ability to make your own minifigure for the sake of unlocking new purchasable ones. Even as a way to support the game post-launch, this is a bit much. My advice to those who still may be tempted by this is to go into the options menu and turn off the promotional content. But I think the community aspects hide so much of this to a point where, at least for me, I didn't care, and I'll take this as a victory to this system. Again, the work done by everyone on these vehicles is phenomenal, and whether it be the licensed properties or original creations, other than the purchasing of some characters and some cars when I had some money to spend after earning it, I really never saw myself going into the online store. If you can't already tell, I think LEGO 2K Drive is brilliant. But it kind of flabbergasted me that I didn't see much talk about it online, outside of its fan circles. And then I remembered that this game released 1 week after The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. I really wanted to pick this up, but 2 full-price games in 1 month just wasn't in the budget. And because Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games, my creative and wanderlust energies of May 2023 were spent in Hyrule rather than the world of 2K Drive. I'm sure this was the same choice of many others as well, and given the history of 2K published games going frequently on sale, many had likely skipped out on playing this in its initial window of relevance. It sort of missed its time in the sun. At the time of this writing, I found it hard to join online lobbies that weren't in its main mode due to low player counts. Time again has not been kind to LEGO 2K Drive. But that doesn't mean it still has to be this way. The lovely thing is, LEGO 2K Drive is still here, and it's a better, stronger game since its May 2023 launch date. Its price has been reduced, there's more community creations than ever, it has new game modes that also work for local play. They added in a whole new zone to drive and race around. There are even small pro-consumer changes, such as the Nintendo Switch version having a cartridge now instead of just a silly little code that the launch version had. Let's be clear, components such as the last one should not have been the case to begin with, but I won't dwell on that because, well, it's not important anymore. If LEGO 2K Drive comes out with a sequel, I may be more skeptical to buy it right away, but I can't deny the game I currently have in front of me, and I'm having a blast with playing right now. It's amazing at how well Visual Concepts did with this, considering that this was the debut title for their Novato team. It's really fun, and it's just everything I want in a LEGO game. I fell out of collecting and playing with LEGO when I was a teenager, mostly due to an imaginary stigma and social pressure. But despite coming out of that silliness, it's been hard for me to get back into it. I don't have my childhood bedroom to permanently landmine my floor with projects, and I don't have the budget to obtain the sets that seem to grow more expensive by the day. The way I've started to find my way back into LEGO, though, is through video games. Digital bricks are far from a substitute for the real thing, but the games that take advantage of their medium to bring the feeling of LEGO to those who may not have the time, space, or money is a way to bring something back that was lost. LEGO Racing is just a slice, but when it's done right, it has the power of using the most timeless of concepts to connect us to the most imaginative play. So play. Play well. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you like what you see, make sure to subscribe so you know when new uploads are released. And if you really enjoyed what you saw, consider leaving a tip so I can someday justify having a LEGO train around my office. Helping with offsetting costs of covering future games. The next upload shouldn't take as long as it took to make this video, but stay tuned for when we revisit something I've wanted to do ever since the last time I tried something different. And until then, keep your stick on the ice.